With all the new anime out and my seasonal recommendations video in the bag, the consensus seems to be that spring 2019 is a little bit of a letdown. We came out of 2018, itself one of the strongest years for anime ever, with an incredible winter season full of must-watch titles, and while the current season has a lot of solid shows that some fans will really love depending on their tastes, it doesn't have much that really compares to Mob Psycho 100, The Promised Neverland, Kaguya-sama, or the still airing Dororo. There are two ways you can look at this situation. You can view it as a drought of content that's going to leave you feeling bored until the summer rolls around, or you can see this season as an opportunity, a chance to chip away at your endless backlog and experience some great older anime that you've been meaning to get around to. If you fall into the latter camp, I'd like to take this moment to humbly recommend that you put the classic street racing anime Initial D at the top of your list. If you don't already know, Initial D follows teenage tofu delivery boy Takumi Fujiwara as he descends into the world of Hashiriya, street racers who compete to master the winding mountain roads of Japan's countryside known as Toge. Takumi's father Bunta was once a champion racer himself, and through those tofu delivery jobs, he's covertly trained his son to be a beast behind the wheel. Though Takumi is brand new to the world of street racing and honestly doesn't give a rat's ass about it at first, he takes to it like a fish to water. Throughout Initial D, we see Takumi take his dad's old AE86 Sprinter Trueno, a Japan-only Toyota Corolla variant with an exceptionally lightweight frame that makes it perfect for drifting, and use it to crush experienced drivers sitting behind the wheels of the most cutting-edge sports cars on the road. In doing so, he rises to prominence as one of the greatest street racers in his home prefecture of Gunma, and eventually in all of Japan. And all the while, his best buddy Itsuki is there to watch and brag about it. On his way to the top, Takumi comes up against some truly talented drivers with truly wild personalities, and his conflicts with them, coupled with an impressively technical and strategic portrayal of street racing, lends each race in the show a level of hype that rivals any shonen battle anime you can name. And the series manages to accomplish that without having to build up any unnecessarily grandiose stakes. The only thing on the line in most arcs of the story is each racer's pride, and that's all Initial D really needs. Each race sees Takumi and his opponents push themselves to their limits, and in doing so, learn a lot about themselves on their way down the hill. And in spite of the fact that they're always just concurrently going from one place to another very quickly, each race packs in its fair share of surprises and clever twists. It's a lot of fun to watch the battles of Initial D in a way that no other anime, racing or otherwise, really replicates. And even outside of the cars, the show has a tone and attitude that sets it apart from most other anime. The dramatic aspects of Initial D's storyline are kind of trashy, honestly. Takumi's driving motivation throughout the series, other than his motivation to drive, obviously, is a fraught relationship with his attractive classmate Natsuki, whose after-school job is going out with a rich guy twice her age in a Enjo Kosai or subsidized dating relationship. That obviously puts a few speed bumps in her and Takumi's way, and it's really just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the problems they face throughout the show. And every other romantic subplot in the series is similarly torrid. Typically, one of Takumi's friends will fall head over heels in love with a new girl for about as long as it takes Takumi to finish the next race, at which point the young lovers will be pulled apart by fate, or more commonly, the guy acting like a total dickhead. Street racers don't need girlfriends becomes the depressing battle cry of the oft-spurned Akina incel stars as they fail to learn from their mistakes time and again. It's pure tawdry soap opera melodrama, which I'm not a fan of most of the time, but that over-the-top drama complements the fast and furious action of the races nicely, and it makes sense for these characters. These are all casual criminals who routinely put their and other people's lives in danger for their own amusement, and you don't expect people like that to fall into happy, stable relationships naturally. That's half the appeal of Initial D. It offers a window into real underground subcultures in Japan that most anime prefer to pretend don't exist at all. And thanks to the input of the Drift King Keiichi Tsuchiya, a legendary Japanese racer who lived in that world and consulted on both the anime and the original manga, its approach to that subject matter has a real air of authenticity to it. Takumi's driving style and choice of car is directly based on Tsuchiya's own drifting career, and his input allows the series to dive into a lot of the technical aspects of racing beyond that one car. A lot of attention is paid to the unique qualities of each car that Takumi goes up against, and by the end of each race, you can really appreciate what makes each one of them special. In a sense, the cars are the waifus in this show, and they're treated with a suitable level of reference. Even if you go into Initial D knowing next to nothing about cars like I did, you'll come out the other end with a pretty solid understanding of how they work and the strategy behind racing. Though, don't be an Itsuki and think that means you can try it for yourself. There are enough bros zooming around in JDM cars they don't know how to drive already. Initial D has a compelling sports drama story, a strong cast of characters, and on top of all of that, it's educational. So what's stopping all of you from diving into the show right now? Well, if you're anything like me, but you don't have a girlfriend who spent years of her life trying to convince you to watch it because it's her favorite anime of all time, the visuals might be a bit of a roadblock for you. CGI in anime is a pretty divisive topic even nowadays, and Initial D makes very heavy use of it, even though the first season was made in 1998. So no, you're not looking at the Initial D PS1 game right now, this is just what the show looks like. And it can be hard to get past that to enjoy the story underneath. Still, that story is worth experiencing, and more than worth putting up with a bit of janky old CGI to enjoy. Still, that story is worth experiencing, and more than worth putting up with a bit of janky old CGI to enjoy. Well, okay, there is a new trilogy of films, helpfully titled New Initial D Movie Legend, that retells the plot important parts of the first season with drastically improved animation and production values. And you might be tempted to watch that instead, but I would strongly caution you against that for two reasons. The first is that the Legend movies cut out a fair bit of the story, which is understandable given their runtime, but still leaves them feeling a bit incomplete. And they also changed Takumi's personality, which isn't a bad thing per se, but does make the films feel disconnected from the second stage of the show onward. Beyond that though, even with its flaws, the bigger reason is that Initial D's first stage still makes for, in my opinion, a better overall viewing experience than the movies do. It has a lot going for it that isn't immediately obvious, and even if you're a Sakuga scholar who watches anime for the animation first and foremost, I think you'll find a bit of value in watching that clunky first season in its entirety, though explaining why will take more than a little bit of time. It is absolutely fair to say that Initial D's first stage hasn't aged very well. Its low-fidelity CGI models and laughably poor texture work, among other problems, instantly date its production and can get in the way of the anime working as an immersive storytelling experience by modern standards, or even by 1998 standards, honestly. The jarring disconnect between the two visual styles is ugly, but it's uniquely ugly, and that ugliness speaks to a lot of groundbreaking work that happened behind the scenes of the show. There's not much information online about how the first stage of Initial D was created, and that's understandable since director Shinichi Masaki and studios Gallop and Comet were probably more concerned with just making the dang thing and putting it on television than they were with documenting their process. But it's still kind of a shame. Initial D was one of the first TV anime to combine heavy use of 3D CGI with conventional 2D character animation, so its production must have been a fascinating exercise in creative problem solving. And given how quickly software advances, and that this is one of just a handful of TV anime in history to combine that much 3D CG with traditional cell-based 2D animation, a lot of the solutions they came up with are likely unique to this one season of this one show. It's in piecing together that production process that I find a lot of the value in revisiting old anime, and games and films for that matter, lies, especially ones made in transitional periods like this one. While they might not be as polished as media made with older techniques or the newer productions that they paved the way for, I enjoy seeing their creative alternative answers to questions that have long since been solved in now industry standard software and tools. Looking online, I wasn't able to find what 3D animation software was used to make Initial D, but nothing that was available in 1998 was really built to do what the studio behind it was trying to do. Basically, everything that you see in the show that's not just a car on a road had to be some kind of bodge. The whole production is noticeably held together with spit and glue, and it's kind of amazing to see the show's animators pushing against the clear limitations of the tools they were working with. When you've seen a few races, for instance, you'll begin to notice that the character sprites of the spectators on the CGI roadsides don't actually move at all. Lighting is applied to some of them in certain shots by presumably fading between two identical sprites that have been colored differently, but they only ever turn around when a car passes in front of them, allowing the static image of them looking one way to be swapped out for one facing in the other direction. Just about the only time that we see the characters actually animated in the same shot as the CGI elements is when they're directly in front of them, like when the road is visible through Takami's windows. In these shots, it looks as though the CGI was simply green screened into the background of the cell animation, which is actually a pretty clever workaround for not having a fully digital animation suite. And what's really cool is seeing how the cars and compositing techniques evolved over the series' 16-year run, something you don't get to experience when you start with the films. The second stage, released a year and a half after the first, dramatically upgrades the graphics to PS2 level and uses all digital animation, which means that while it's not exactly pretty, it's more conventionally ugly for its time. The third stage movie, animated at Studio Dean, is pretty gorgeous, as anime films tend to be, and by the fourth stage, they'd figured out cel shading techniques to make the cars look great on TV too. And it really just gets prettier going forward from there. The various stages of Initial D all look wildly different from one another, and not just because of rapidly developing technology. Aside from the last two, they were all produced at different studios under 3 different directors. The creative team behind the series has changed almost as much as its underlying technology, but there has been one constant that's kept all of those different pieces from feeling disjointed. One undeniable strength that has made Initial D stand out from the very beginning, and that still makes it worth watching to this day, even though Initial D Legend is a thing. You're probably not familiar with the name Masafumi Mima, but I can guarantee that you know his work. Sound designers are the unsung heroes of anime production. Their job is to make what you're seeing sound real, and by the nature of that job, when they do it right, their work becomes invisible. When you heard that sound I just played, you didn't hear a bunch of digital distortion effects applied to presumably the recorded noise of a plastic lid opening. You heard a Pokeball opening. And you heard it because Masafumi Mima, working in this case with sound effect artist Daisuke Jinbo, painstakingly crafted a soundscape that let you believe in a world where incredible monsters can be stored in pocket-sized capsules. And while sound directing for the Pokemon anime is Mima's longest-running gig, that's just one entry in a mile-long list of career accomplishments. You know how you can hear the individual components firing when someone in Attack on Titan uses their maneuverable gear, the hydraulic hiss, the whirring of the spooled cable, the clang of the spikes hooking into a wall? That's a Masafumi Mima joint. You know, the distinctive resonant sound of transmutation in Full Metal Alchemist, the mechanical clinking you hear as Ed moves his automail and Al lumbers around in his empty armor? That was Mima too. The visceral punches that punctuate every fight in Hajime no Ippo, the sound of Izuku Midoriya charging one for all and breaking his whole arm for the 50th time in My Hero Academia, the ominous grinding of Lil Slugger's rollerblades as he chases down his next victim in Paranoia Agent. Mima mixed and mastered them all. And it was Masafumi Mima who brought the blazing fast penis compensators of Initial D roaring to life as well. This anime showcases some of the strongest, most meticulous work in the man's absolutely legendary career, and to this day, I would argue it stands as one of the best sound-directed anime of all time. And in a way, the animation shortcomings make it easier to appreciate what this oft-overlooked art can do in that first season. The attention to detail in Initial D's sound design is nothing short of incredible. The engine noise of each individual car on the road is distinct and accurate to its real-world equivalent. Takami's iconic AE86 sounds completely different from the rotary engine of Keisuke's RX-7, and even from the differently tuned AE86 driven by Wataru Akiyama that we see in the second stage. As you watch the show, you start to recognize certain cars before they even appear on screen. And the engines are just the tip of the iceberg. The thunk of the gear shift moving, the squeal of tires on asphalt, the sound of car doors unlatching, it all sounds just right. The soft, rhythmic dinging of Takami's high-speed indicator, which of course activates in every race, becomes an almost Pavlovian signal, letting you know that you're about to see some real shit go down and helping to narrow your focus to the action on screen. These sounds just suck you in, making you feel like you're watching real cars tear through real mountain passes at real insane speeds, even when you're looking at PS1 caliber facsimiles of the real deal. Even with its noticeably dated visuals, Initial D is truly exhilarating to watch. It has this uncanny way of dragging you to the edge of your seat with every race. Of course, not all the credit for that can go to the anime's sound effect work. There is another part of Initial D's soundscape that cannot be ignored, and that I'm sure at least a segment of the people watching this are screaming for me to talk about already. Eurobeat. Initial D is a unique exploration of Japan's underground street racing subculture, and a celebration of what a man can accomplish when his sole focus is getting to the bottom of a hill really, really fast. But, and this is equally important, Initial D is also a mixtape. Each season is scored with a choice selection of catchy Eurobeat jams that, played back-to-back, account for nearly 10 hours of whatever the opposite of easy listening is. If you're not familiar with Eurobeat, well, you will be by the time you finish watching this anime, but to put it briefly, it's a fast, intense style of dance music that evolved out of the Italian disco scene in the 1980s and became big in Japan shortly thereafter, where it was the sound of the booming para-para nightclub industry. And when Initial D hit in 1998, it breathed new life into the genre by including it in its soundtrack. Eurobeat's rapid, loud techno rhythms proved to be a perfect accompaniment not just to fun group dances, but also to imagery of spinning tires, swerving cars, and things going really fast in general. In the internet age, it's become a meme to slap Eurobeat songs on literally any kind of quick motion. It makes exciting races more exciting, and funny clips of animals running around all the funnier, but nobody would have made that connection without Initial D. This cannot be overstated. Masafumi Mima's decision to underscore the climax of each race in Initial D with Eurobeat was nothing short of inspired. It gave Initial D a distinct musical identity that made it stand out from everything else on air at the time, and that was perfectly suited for its brand of action. In return, Initial D proved to be a phenomenal vehicle for advancing the careers of the artists who worked on its various soundtracks. As a direct result of the anime's success, cars and racing became a predominant theme in the lyrics of Eurobeat songs, many of which were then used in future seasons of Initial D. The show and the genre had a symbiotic relationship, which only makes sense because they were truly perfect for each other. And that is where the Legend movies really stumble. The new films are the only Initial D anime out there that Masafumi Mima didn't work on. Instead, Yoji Shimizu took charge of them, and as a result, they're the only Initial D anime to use rock instead of Eurobeat for their soundtracks. And while they feature some damn good rock songs, none of them are anywhere near as perfectly suited to Initial D's racing action as the original show's coked-up disco tracks. And it's not just the soundtrack that falls short. The films are, generally speaking, a little lacking in the sound design department, too. To be clear, Yoji Shimizu is no slouch when it comes to sound direction. His work on the new Lupin the Third series, and especially on Redline, is absolutely top-notch. To his credit, he also did exceptional work on the Initial D movies, but Masafumi Mima's work was just better. The sound effects in the films are more distant and less punchy than those in the show, and while the film's mix is arguably a more realistic representation of what you'd be likely to hear from the curbside of a race, it just doesn't put you in the action in the same way. As a result of that, I legitimately have more fun watching the positively antique racing animation of the TV series than I do watching the new movies, even though, in theory, their production values and cinematography should leave the old series in the dust. Somewhat ironically, the show has become the dinky little 8.6 that could next to the film's souped-up RX-7. Of course, much like the RX-7, the films are still really good, and I'd encourage everyone who loves Initial D to give them a watch, just not as a substitute for the original series. You'd be missing out on so much great character development, a few great races, and so many great songs if you did. Plus, you'd miss out on seeing one of the most stunning glow-ups in anime history, and that alone kind of makes that first season worthwhile. Now, if you do get into Initial D, there is one catch. Both the new movies and the original series have been released in English, the former by Sentai, the latter by Funimation, and the show even has a really good English dub, but Funimation never actually bothered to finish it, so the official English releases of the series only go up to the 4th stage, and you'll have to find your own way to watch it from there. It could be worse, the last 2 seasons could be completely inaccessible by any means, but it's still pretty disappointing. I really think that Initial D deserves a full legal English release, and if you feel the same way, I would urge you to very nicely let Sentai and Funimation know through Twitter and other means that you'd be interested in buying the 5th and final stages on Blu-ray, or at least in watching them on a streaming platform. Even a sub-only limited release would be better than the nothing we have right now. But even with those caveats, Initial D is a journey that is still well worth going on for anime fans new and old. Let me know in the comments below what you think of Initial D if you've seen it, and what other classic anime you'd most like to see me cover in the future. My channel's been almost all about seasonal stuff for a good while now, and while I enjoy that a lot, I'd like to help my audience find some great old shows to watch too. Oh, and if you want to see more of that, or more weekly coverage of anime in general, don't forget to hit subscribe while you're down there. I'm Geoff Thew, professional shitbag, signing out from my mother's basement.